record now. Got it. Okay. You'll see something come up that says, telling you it's recording. Just hit got it.
It's there. I did got it. All right, for everybody.
Here's Josie. I got Josie. And Stacy's here. And Judith, we normally don't start till about 8:05 because people are coming in.
I figured.
Here's Audrey. And Adrian and I are remembering to record, which is amazing.
That's great.
Hi, Audrey.
Hi, Audrey. I can't see anybody, but hi, Audrey.
Don't worry about it.
Hello, hello.
I will.
And we have Karen Bloom and Stacy.
Hi, Karen. Karen Bloom. So Karen Bloom is the way that I got the NPR interview. Karen's friend is Sharon.
Here's Rita coming in.
Stacy Holderbach is here.
Hi, Rita Singer.
Hi, Stacy.
Rebecca Bonham.
Rebecca's my publisher. That's Blue Jade Press, Rebecca.
Kitty is here.
How do I disable my texts? If I shut my phone, maybe?
Yeah,
You can put it on silence.
put it
Well,
on silent. So you
I'm
need,
shutting it. I have a new laptop and it syncs with your
Why
phone.
is my speaker not working?
who
We hear you,
said that?
Rita.
'Cause
Rita, we
you.
can hear you. I can mute Rita.
Yeah, your speaker is working, Rita.
She can't hear us.
2 more minutes. Good to see you, Ann. Stacy.
Oh, there's Kitty. Hi, Kitty.
All right. Give it another 2 minutes.
Okay.
We're
Hi.
filling-
Alana Drucker, hi.
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 Hi, everybody. Excited for you. Great.
Alana's another wonderful writer. Are you in New York or Florida?
I am in Florida. I just got back.
Readings.
Thank you.
Bringing Rita back in.
I love your shirt, Alana. That's pretty fabulous.
I know.
Thank you so much. Like 3 colors.
It's great and brave in Florida.
Yeah.
Lana, you might want to, our next one is that our next That Nourish is at the end of September. And it's with an author who wrote a book about the Rowe family, the real Rowe family. So
Oh, wow.
I'll remind Judith to send you the invitation.
I will.
Please do. Thank
I
you.
will.
Thanks, Shirley.
Oh, the book is excellent. Everybody should read it. Very, very readable,
Yeah, very readable.
even though it's filled with facts, but it reads like a story.
Yeah.
It's well worth the time.
Oh, absolutely.
I think Geraldine's coming in. Okay. All right. So the only person who normally is here early, who I don't see, is Carol. But
She's away.
Yeah, she must be away because I sent her an email and haven't heard back. And that's very unusual.
okay. Well, then, Adrian, should I start? Okay. Judith, whoops, here comes June Zimmerman.
I can let people interrupt.
Okay, I'm turning that over to you because I'm going to do the introduction. Welcome to At Nourish. For those of you who are new to At Nourish, it's Shomrei Emunah's speaker series. We used to do this in person and then started to do it on Zoom. And actually, it's given more people a chance to attend. So we've been doing this. We were off for the summer. So thank you, Judith, for reopen. This is our fall opening. This is like the theater, our theater. We're reopening, and it is wonderful to open with someone as special as Judith. So for most of us at Shomrei, know Judith as this person who shows up at synagogue, works her heart out, helps, does deep work with our refugee program, and certainly with the 2 young men we have in the program right now from Afghanistan. And she has been a wonderful teacher for them. And as I've watched Judith, yes, Judith is very special, Stacy, I agree. As I've watched Judith work with these 2 guys and work on writing poetry and helping them with their English, became clear to me that Judith knew something about poetry more than those of us who just read it. And so the next thing I know is Judith is talking about this book that she has completed. And I was like, what? You did what? And she said, yeah, I did. So here's what I learned about Judith. During COVID, some of us learned how to bake sourdough bread. Some of us did some knitting. Judith got her MFA. She followed her dreams and worked really hard and got her MFA. And in that process, created this book. I will hold it up. I was at her reading at the Watchung Booksellers. This is Judith's book. It is the Pugilist's daughter, also known as Judith. And listening to the reading and then starting to read this on my own, I realized how powerful Judith's words were and how moving they were. And so this is Judith's first publication. And with that, I'm going to let Judith tell you a little more about how it evolved. And then she's going to read. And if you have questions, I don't want to break up Judith's reading because she's thought very deeply about what she wants to share with us. Throw your questions into the chat. I will monitor them, and then I will present them to Judith. So with that, I'm going to ask you all to mute. And Judith, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. And can you hear me, everybody? Shirley, first of all, thank you for that lovely, generous introduction and for everything you do, because what don't you do? For organizing the At Nourish programs and inviting me to participate tonight. And everybody who's who's logged in tonight, thank you for spending time with me and my poems. I really appreciate it. Okay, so last Wednesday, a few hours before my Watchung bookstore reading, I was told I had to vacate my apartment immediately. Crying, I called one of my besties and I said, Jackie, what am I going to do? Can I come over? And she said, yes. And Jackie, her wife, Linda, and their daughter, Abby, graciously welcomed me. I've been here since. Very short reason, the bathroom pipes in my apartment are responsible for the leaks in the building. So it's a week. I'm still here. They've just been wonderful and generous and kind. And I went to my apartment today figuring I could do the reading from there. And I walked into what's like a hazardous waste site. So here I am a week later, still with Jackie, Linda, and Abby. And anybody would be lucky to have one of Jackie, Linda, or Abby. I have all 3. So the 3 of you, I love you, thank you. And I'm so grateful. So a little bit about my background and the origin of this book. Stories. We are all stories, and we all come from stories, and then we spend the rest of our lives sharing them in some form. Well, I've been telling my story since I was about 4 years old, which is when I met Jackie, in verse, in poetic forms, creating poems, as opposed to memoir or fiction. So I've been writing the stories that I live and the stories I witness as poems throughout my entire life, except one subject, my childhood. So when I tried to write about my childhood and the trauma, I couldn't. I didn't want to remember. I didn't want to go there. This was last spring, 2021, as Shirley had mentioned. I was completing my MFA. My thesis advisor insisted the only way my thesis and ultimately my debut collection would have any meaning was to write about my childhood, write about the painful way it happened. And I was just, I don't know how to start. So she suggested the poetic form pantoum, and this is where form comes in. Pantoum is a shadow poem. So the first and third line of the second stanza repeats the second and fourth lines of the previous stanza, and it goes this way throughout. So it's repetition. And it worked for me because I think just writing and reading and sitting with the same lines twice allowed me to really like just nurture the past slowly and unearth those memories I didn't want to revisit gently and deliberately. So what I did with the Pugilist Daughter, I started experimenting with forms because it really worked for me. Beside the pantoum, the villanelle, and the Japanese short forms, haiku, and then there are many other, which it's not a lesson on forms. So I'll get to that when I read a poem that uses those forms. And just learning about the poetic forms and how form can feed content, which was not how I used to write. I always thought content, then form. But having form provide content really opened me up to writing in the raw. And it changed the way I tell my stories. So tonight I'm going to read 5 poems. If you're at the Watchung bookstore reading, 4 will sound familiar, 1 I did not read. And I'm starting with a, I'm just going to make this larger. I'm starting with a pantoum. So at the height of the pandemic, I would look out my bedroom window and I saw Manhattan. And I was reassured when I saw the buildings, the skyline still glittering and shining because there was some life and it just seemed like we were all surrounded by so much death. So this is a pantoum about that. I used to wave to Manhattan. It's called Hold On, Manhattan, Hold On. Silence is strong and something is wrong. Like one of those summer nights, it's sleeping in a city skyline after a scorching August Sunday. Like one of those summer nights when humidity finally breaks after a scorching August Sunday and sun sets and everyone is too tired when humidity finally breaks. We sit on stoops, porches, fire escapes, and sunsets, and everyone is too tired to do anything. So we smash pots and pans. We sit on stoops, porches, fire escapes. Tonight feels like that kind of August Sunday to do anything, so we smash pots and pans. We practice Beethoven to pass time. Tonight feels like that kind of August Sunday, so we wait for friends to text. We practice Beethoven to pass time. Tonight we wait for friends' next breath, so we wait for friends to text. Tonight we wait for friends' next breath. Breathe, friend, breathe. We sit, we inhale, we wait. We wonder about our next cup of coffee. Breathe, friend, breathe. We stand in warrior pose and count stars. We wonder about our next cup of coffee. It's sleeping in a city skyline. We stand in warrior pose and count stars. Silence is strong and something is wrong. So my grandma Ida was from Belarus, specifically from Minsk. I think I could say this, she was a pain in the ass. She was a force of nature. And there was always something about her, but I was such a young kid, I didn't know what. And I always knew there was something. She was a card-carrying communist, I found out after she died. She was a member of the International Lady Garment Workers Union, where the title comes from. So after she died, I had so many questions. And so this poem is for my grandma, and it's just a lot of questions and observations. We'll build and we'll fight in memory of Grandma Ida. Mornings I visit. We sit at your kitchen table musing over the Russian couple in 4L who devours sticks of butter like bananas and bananas with utensils. You stare at me, wistful. I was 8. You still dance. These kitchen walls hold your broken dreams in a language I do not understand. Songs we sing in an accent I cannot understand. Wood blocks inked in red and white from a country's borders I will not cross. We navigate downtown Passaic, our Medina of the West, a maze of streets dotted by immigrants' boutiques, sparkly dresses and shiny gowns. I want one. Your sewing suffices, you deem. I never understand your eyes. You have no words for the silent pain. Instead, you sing songs that sound like war to disguise your hurt. so I cannot see. If you speak Portuguese, the word you're looking for is saudade. Quickly walk past window dressing toward Kresge's luncheon counter. Slowly slurp down chocolate root beer floats. Rewards for not buying bourgeois, you brag. Were you loved? Did you love? I never met your brother. 2 years later, you wave goodbye. Along the Hudson, a floating castle appears before my 10-year-old eyes. I am your home, but Minsk calls you back one last time. Decades later, I will arrange rocks on a rock, your tombstone. But this year I wait for you. Today, in a Passaic with too much bling, we stand outside a drive-through burger shop where we once drank Kresge's ice cream soda pop. Bail bond kiosks hide bourgeois mannequins, bitter tales deposit in your murky eyes. Minsk remains an anthem infused with old wounds. Ghosts of Cossacks reappear. Come back to flaunt today's pogroms. Did you love your mother? Did your father love you? Were you a poet, a translator? Did you stitch flags or uniforms? You never explain your role in the revolution, so I emerge from history with my own fight. At your funeral, I recall battle cries for workers' rights, songs we sang, united we're strong, let us march toward the dawn of a brave new workers' world. Why did your manifesto grip you so tight? What happened to your mother and father? I was afraid to ask, afraid of what you know, afraid of your past, afraid of what I'd learn, afraid I would not understand. Okay. So tonight is the first time I'm reading a poem about my childhood trauma, which was my mom's trauma. It's from Leaving Home, the first section of this book, and really the genesis of this collection. And these were the memories I did not want to dredge up, but needed to. And this is another pantoum. It's the pantoum that really got me started on writing this form. The Pugilist's Wife. This one's the hardest. So I buried it with my 3rd grade plastic cat eye frames and orange purple bell bottoms. There she was, my mama, with my 3rd grade plastic cat eyes in the boxing ring beside him. There she was, my mama, taking hits, avoiding corners in the boxing ring beside him. She hid the scars inside her apple bundt cake, taking hits, avoiding corners. There she was, my mama, ducking his thrown leftovers. She hid the scars inside her apple bundt cake, stayed up late with me writing nightmares. There she was, my mama, ducking his thrown leftovers, dodging jars of PB and J he smashed against the kitchen nook. Stayed up late with me writing nightmares. There she was, my mama, never a cleaner, always a cook, dodging glass jars of honey he smashed against the kitchen nook. This one's the hardest. I denied it, could not write it. There she was, my mama, never a cleaner, always a cook. A sustained right hook flung her 50 years later to memory care. This one's the hardest. I denied it, could not write it. I buried it with my father's fists in my mother's shame. A sustained right hook flung her 50 years later to memory care. This one's the hardest. So I buried it with my younger self. I buried it with my father's fists in my mother's shame. Here she is, my mama, her cauliflowered brain, her boxer's brain. This one's the hardest. So I buried it with my younger self in orange purple bell bottoms. Here she is, my mama, her cauliflowered brain, her boxer's brain. This one's the hardest. So I buried it. Las Vegas. Dusk follows me inside Red Rock Canyon walls. One eagle, one lizard, one memory call me from deep inside a canyon. I lie down on hot chocolate sculpted boulders and listen to a memory, a canyon story cloaked inside a crevice. What does a red rock remember? This is how memory unfolds. Oxygen, time, rainstorms, flash floods. Cranberry Rock forms where Mama once watched a hawk circle the canyon for an hour. Or did she, if she does not remember? She sits in a wheelbarrow because I cannot, will not pair wheel with chair. Did I lock my door before leaving for Las Vegas? I seek possibility. All's prayer kills possibility. I call all's hires all's prayer because the real word plunders. My word prays, so she sits in a wheelbarrow with all's prayer. I feel better, does mama? I lock my door every single day, sometimes every single 3 times a day. I do not believe in prayer, yet I pray every single 10 times a day. She will stand up, sit down in a chair, not a wheelbarrow. Why did we eat Chinese food every Christmas day? I pray she confuses my sister and me because she is tired, not because she has all's prayer. I pray she asks to meet Allison and me to eat shrimp dumplings with her at Hopkey on Canal Street at midnight. I pray she embarrasses me and flirts with the owners and their sons. What is the color of memory? I pray she teaches me once more how to fold a fitted sheet so all 4 corners neatly match. I pray all's prayer is all's a mistake. Memory is the color of red rock deep inside a canyon where mama unknowingly slides. And finally, so as Shirley mentioned, we're part of a group that has really taken on these Afghan brothers that we adore them. They are our family and they just inspire me. So this poem is in 3 parts. It's new, and this is where I was experimenting with form and Japanese forms more than haiku. There's kata uta, sadoka, etc. But haiku is 5-7-5. That's how many syllables in each line. So all of this poem is, every stanza and every line is 5 or 7 syllables, all of it. It's in 3 parts. The first part is about our brothers, and the second part is about Ukraine and people I've spoken to and stories I've read about the war. And the third part is just a mashup of the 2, and love and war, war in the time of love, love in the time of war. From Kabul to Kiev. Does occupation erase memory? If so, what replaces it? Part 1, Dreaming in Dari. We need your stories. Fleeing history without your mother's blessing. You stored your joy at the border, your father's love you hid in Pashto. My Afghan brothers, tonight we celebrate you and break pita together. Your sisters back home forbidden to break open books in school, yet you laugh, you plan. Eyes that saw floggings try to expunge screaming and howling on a hot airport tarmac. Echoes grow louder. I read you Whitman, you read me Rumi. The sun rises, but your mother's not allowed to watch it glow. She, a teacher long ago. In Kabul, you did not play soccer in snow. In a desert, you boot a football rolled in hope and ideas. In a park in Jersey, you sculpt an American snowman, kick a soccer ball, hope to see your family again one day. An idea. How does memory smell? Lemons, family, love. You relive Kabul. I'm your captive audience. We make up new words for brave. Part 2, Daring in Donbass. If our metaphors fall into mass graves unread, if our elegies flattened by landmines unheard, if we ink our poems with blood, they kiss in drizzling mist, standing near a football pitch. Shells ricochet, a teenage boy strikes a ball. An old lady limps out for a walk with her dog. Barrage of missiles batter. You shield her body with your own. Limbs spiral like Vincent's Starry Night. Her dog collapses. They hide in a car, burned by bombs, shattered windows, seared flesh, shards mixing with blood. They kiss at last. They kiss as strangers. They kiss as maybe. Rain pummeled where a door closed this morning. A monarch flapping its wings. The charred corpses rest beside their floor mat. They kiss by mistake. They kiss too soon. Artillery ripped open their hiding place. It was never sustainable. A false bunker shreds hearts. A caterpillar dies. Part 3, Retreating from Rain. Distance and goodbye creates possibility. Cracks in the sky heal. Trees eventually hold hands, and sometimes clouds burst. Desire is burden, not the burden of missiles shredding to bits your city, your country, your roots, of an old language, absence. What they miss, picking sunflowers, planting sunflowers, picking ruby wild strawberries the shape of each other's lips, a last taste of summer. They went to sleep, did not speak. They waltzed beneath storm, slivers of light and metal. She wears her wedding dress. He wears his uniform. Shrapnel resonates. Does occupation replace memory? If war erases love, we'll kiss between ceasefires. Thank you. I think Shirley's muted. I think everyone's muted.
I'm unmuting myself. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think part of the reason we're muted is because you leave us speechless. I see heads nodding. So I imagine there are responses that you're feeling. I'm talking to our gallery here, as we say. And so I can always ask you to read more, but before we do that, I thought we'd pause and have you respond or ask any questions that you have of Judith. God, this is a quiet group. I
Yes,
see.
poetry does that.
Hmm?
For some reason, poet elicits a quiet response.
Yeah, and I see the comments that talk about this being very powerful.
I think Sky has her hand.
Yes, I have more so of a comment, but maybe it'll lend some insight into why you chose the Pantone format. That's what you called it, right? Because I didn't know the exact name, but I could pick up on that when I was especially reading the first part about your childhood. And it's interesting because something I've been learning, because I'm a psychology researcher, is how memories are processed when you go through trauma, and how they're not really processed in the traumatic brain. And part of that is they come because of that, you lose a sense of time, of temporality, and of space, and they come in fragments, and they go backwards and forwards again. So I almost felt like I was reading processing trauma when I would read the format of the Pantone. So I think that was perfectly done for what you were doing, which was processing a tough childhood. So I really appreciated that. So I don't know if you consider that while doing it, or that actually reflected how your memories were like when you were writing the stuff down.
Thank you, Sky. You could tell she's in college still. Yes, I was processing, exactly. I mean, I didn't want to do it. And I was processing the memories by just going back and forth, which is why the Pantone, it gave me the opportunity to okay, repeat it. And a lot of erasure, a lot of, ripping up, throwing out. I sometimes compose by hand. And so, yeah, and we all know, we all know about trauma and processing it. And the first thing for me was avoidance and denial. And then it's diving in and, a few steps forward and more steps backward. So yes, good observation. Yeah.
So somebody else said, most people, I guess this is Rebecca, most people write for themselves. What inspired you, Judith?
Well, a lot. Like I said, I've been writing my entire life, and my childhood, because I was always scared. I wrote. I really, it sounds cliche, but poetry saved my life, and books. I was just reading, writing. So I think my entire childhood inspired me. And ironically, my father inspired me. My parents were like the uneven bookends of my childhood. My father, the pugilist, my mother, the idealist, my father, the boxer, my mother, the dreamer. And so they both, I probably would not have written a word without my traumatic childhood and without both of my parents. The complete antithesis of each other.
So when you say just want to stay with that one for a minute. When you say poet writing saved you, what does that feel like? What does that mean?
So I was always scared, right? And so it was my therapy. I mean, because when you're young, I'm 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My father was in the house till I was 13. Actually, the night before my bat mitzvah, their divorce came final, and that was the best birthday present. So poetry saved me because it was something to turn to. I mentioned Jackie earlier. So her mom read the book in a car on the way to Abby's graduation and never knew anything, because you don't talk about it as a child, right? So I didn't talk to anyone, not grown-ups, not my friends. So my poetry, my journals, my books, they were again, it sounds cliche, they were my best friends. It was where I turned to. It was what made me feel safe, because I never felt safe. Books and writing.
Thanks. So Karen just put a question in the chat, and what Karen said, your advisor knew you needed to share your childhood memories. What did your advisor know when your advisor said, Judith, you have to do that? That's pushing some real deep boundaries.
It is, and we really weren't that close, and it was always on Zoom. But what she knew, because I had her for a poetry workshop class, she knew that I ran. A lot of my poems in class were running, and then in this book about being, going to Poland, moving to Berlin, moving to San Francisco, I couldn't get far away enough from my family. And she saw that and knew that in my collection, and she said, Judith, your poems don't talk to each other. Why did you run? Why are you, what? And so that's what began it. She said, you have to write about your family, you have to write about your childhood, and what are you running from? What are you running toward? And I was embarrassed. I mean, I think other people who come from this kind of background, you always think everyone has this wonderful, beautiful, perfect family. I walk around Montclair and I always think that. And I was like, how are people going to look at me? And I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. And growing up, I didn't want that, I just wanted to be treated like everyone else. So, but she saw that the theme of my poetry was always running. It was like, it was in Europe, in California, anywhere but here. So
she understood the running as a metaphor.
She did, yeah. And the funny thing is, her husband is from Belarus, I think Minsk, and she has spent time in Minsk, and so there was some connection.
So I just want to note what Josie said. Josie said you took a family disaster and turned it into art.
Oh, Josie, thank you.
Yeah. The saving grace from your childhood to adulthood. That's lovely. Here's a question from Audrey. And you said you've been writing poetry since you've been a child, which is not always a form that's accessible by children, although I guess we do teach them little children's poetry all the time, right? But Audrey's question is, why poetry rather than essays or fiction or other forms? And by the way, this is a good time to tell them how you write on a day-to-day level as well, because Judith writes in many forms, and I think that's so interesting.
That's a great question, Audrey. I decided after many decades of writing poetry is that we don't choose to write poetry or to be poets. I really think it finds us and then it kicks our ass. I feel like, because you're right, Shirley, as a child, what do I know about haiku, pantoum, or free verse or anything? And the way, right, we don't know. And I just instinctively, like my early notebooks, I mean, terrible poems, but they're just a few words and there's a form and a shape. And I was getting my anger and sadness and fear out through poems. And it carried me through. And I always went back to poetry, that was accidental. So I really do believe when someone says, oh, I want to be a poet, how can I be a poet? I don't know. I really think it finds us, it grabs us, hooks us, and knocks the crap out of us. I love writing it. And Shirley, the second part of your question, so I don't have a schedule, I know Audrey and I have talked about this. I don't write, 8 to 10 in the morning or 4 to 5 at night. Although as I get older, it's funny, I used to be a night writer and now I have to write when the sun is shining. And I love writing outside, anywhere outside. And I just, poems find me. Not last Friday, the Friday before, it was my first Kabbalah Shabbat with Rabbi Julie. And I was sitting there and so moved. And it was L'cha Dodi, I think. And the left stained glass window, so the south facing, was reflecting. It was like a kaleidoscope and it was shining light on that wall. And then across over the beam on the white wall, there was just this entire wall of color. And Rabbi Julie is singing, and I had met her at a dessert meeting, but it's the first time I heard her sing. And it was so overwhelming. And I typically cry inside at shul on Friday nights. I love it. And I just started writing a poem in my head. And so I always say poems find us. And so I went home and started writing. I don't know what it'll be because it usually ends up being something else. But what I always say, I taught these workshops during Zoom, during the height of the pandemic through Succeed Together. This was incredible. It was 7th to 9th graders-ish. And they were an amazing group of kids. They never took poetry. And the first thing I said is, let poems find you. Smell, see, hear, taste, touch, no rules. And it was the second or third workshop. And this young boy, he was amazing. He had this great moment and I witnessed his aha moment. He just screamed out, Miss Judith, we don't have to use punctuation or capitalization in poetry. He's like, I love poetry. I'm gonna be a poet. I thought, oh, I've found one. So it just finds us in so many different ways.
Thank you. So Judith, the questions are coming in and I'm going to take them in order, although I probably should skip to Sarita's, but let's do Ken Bannerman's first. Ken's question is, now that you have written the book of poems about your childhood, do you feel any sense of relief or comfort that you've shared the experience? And can you now live in the present without the memories hanging over? Or how do you live in the present, having at least put the memories out front?
I love these questions.
Easy,
Yes.
right?
This is fantastic. It was cathartic. A lot of tears and sweat. Yes, it was, like 10 years of therapy. So, and I'm not done writing about my childhood. I'm able to live in the present. And more importantly, I'm not angry. And that was the hugest thing, just forgiving my father and just getting over all of that, mostly anger. And I write about so many other things, more fun things like genocide and war and unrequited love. But yeah, I do live in the present and I appreciate the present so much. Like I said, I'm sitting here with Jackie, Linda, and Abby, and I'm just, every minute I'm grateful and present, and I'm just, humbled. But it did help. It helped so much for me to just move forward. And I think that's actually why I was able to finally get my MFA and finish it and write this book. And I've started my second book. A lot of those walls and fear and anger just melted. I mean, it's always with you, but I could live.
And we're really glad you're sharing it with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess Sarita, now Sarita has a more esoteric question. She said, it raises the question, what is poetry and what makes a poem a poem?
Oh, Sarita, that's my critical thesis. Thank you. So yeah, we had two parts. What is poetry? So it's really interesting because poets could be journalists, right? And if anyone's familiar with Carolyn Forche, and if you're not, find her. She was, wow, thank you, Sarita. So she was in El Salvador the lead up to the Civil War, right, in the late 70s. And she recorded it and she wrote about it and it came out as poetry. And then, of course, it's the 70s. And I think partially because she was a poet, but more because she was a woman, criticized, how are you a poet, writing in a journalistic style via poetry about this war? Well, I mean, she was there, she lived it, she had death squads after her. So what and what makes a poem? The lack of parameters, although forms have very tight rules, but it's expression, whether it's journalism and writing about, there's a famous poem she wrote about the colonel in El Salvador and the death squads. And it's not an essay. And so it's a combination of so many, I think, so many different genres, because sometimes poetry could read like memoir. But it's not, you're not reading a fiction, you're not reading a novel. And so it's the way lines fall. I mean, if you want to get technical with enjambment and line breaks and free verse, so there are rules within the lack of rules in poetry. And so, because sometimes you have a prose poem, and how is that? It's not Proust, it's, I think, more easy to digest, but everyone's so afraid of it and can't digest it. But then poets, back to poetry as journalism, poets, if we don't write about it, I mean, during the pandemic, so many times we're asked, like, did you write about it? Or September 11th or Ukraine war. So if we write about it, sometimes we're criticized as, how dare you, you're not journalists. But if we don't write about it, you can't just write about love or, or whatever. So it's a very gray area, really.
And that's for another discussion, right, Judith? We should do a whole seminar on what is poetry, but we'll save that. Before I ask Josie's question, which is another big question on who inspires you now, I want to open it up. Alana had a question, and I'm going to let Alana ask you.
Oh, hi. It's not so much a question as a series of comments and observations. And thank you for putting this together. And I finished the book and gave it to my mother, who devoured it. What I feel and what I noticed, and I write poetry, but nowhere close to what I'm reading with this brilliant woman. And I want to say that I feel like, in addition to being cathartic and obviously, a forum for expressing and perhaps dealing with the trauma of childhood, this strikes me as twofold. One, that Judith isn't a historian, right? She is a family historian and an oral historian. And she's teaching us not only about the history of her family, but history at large. And then I also feel like through her poetry, Judith is a tour guide. The details and the repetition and the ability to take us to each individual place, whether it's, Passaic, New Jersey, or Krakow, Poland, you are a tour guide. And the way that you evoke place and time through the details and through the texture that you create draws us in. I almost feel like the reader is there with Judith as a storyteller. And finally, the last thing that I want to say, just, top of my head, is that you were talking about the form and how all of these different forms, which is honestly new to me as someone who's never really studied poetry in a formal way, is the form may be something that you're conscious of, but I feel like, again, when they're being relayed, it's so seamlessly woven into a story. And Judith is a storyteller, even though the forms may be conscious. So I just wanted to share some of those thoughts with you. And thank you again for writing this.
Oh gosh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Alana, you are a beautiful writer. I've read your work.
So, and thank you, Alana. Kitty said, so well said and so true, Alana. And I'm glad you didn't try and put all of that in the chat and that you could say it yourself. So thanks for that. Judith, there's a question from June as to who inspires you now? What poets inspire you?
So currently, because I'm playing with Japanese forms, Victoria Chang, she just put out a book, The Trees Witness Everything, but she also wrote Dear Memory, which is kind of letters, even though it's in a poetic form. And she's a gorgeous writer. And I'm learning a lot about Japanese form through reading her book. Tracy K. Smith has always been my inspiration. I encourage everyone, if you're interested, Life on Mars. It's stunning. Although she wrote a poem in that book about David Bowie and Warren Zevon, not Warren Zevon, no, maybe it was, anyway, they died, soon after that book. So you don't want Tracy K. Smith to write about you. but she's always been one of my favorite. Yeah, Carolyn Forche. I mean, I always take books everywhere. This is since I'm a child, even like if I get bored or I don't have anyone to talk to. So lately I'm carrying Victoria Chang and Tracy K. Smith or Carolyn Forche. Early on, even though I write nothing like him, E.E. Cummings has always been one of my favorite. There's so many, but those three women. Oh, and Camille, I'm blanking out of her, Camille Rankin. I love. She wrote the trilogy on race, a dialogue, basically a conversation. I highly recommend her as well. There are many, and there are a lot of male writers. I'm just not coming to because I'm reading these women right now.
That's great. Thank you. So one more question, and then I'm going to ask you to do something, Judith. Stacy says she would love to take a poetry workshop with you. Are there any coming up? And I think you have a lot of people here who might be interested in that.
Oh, wow. I hold poetry workshops when people want them, when they find me. And so if there's an interest, I love teaching. I never taught until the pandemic. And I learned that I could get people excited about writing poetry, especially people who are afraid of writing poetry. So if people are interested, I mean, I should put in my chat my website because it isn't, it's not coming up. My web designer keeps trying to get this to come up on Google when you put my name in, but it hasn't happened yet. So poemingaround.com, one of the tabs is poetry workshops. And I briefly describe how I teach because there's no one way. I always say, like, these kids, these students, they brought to the workshop their imagination and their desire. And then I tailor it. I know Liza Cohn set up the Passover Haggadah workshop. It was so much fun, a lot of tears, a lot of great poetry, but I obviously teach that and run that differently than students. So you could find me on, and also anybody who's local, you can find me around town, but I do love teaching workshops. So that's definitely something I'd like to do.
And you needed to see Judith do poetry with our 14-year-old Afghan high school student. So that was magic. So I totally endorse Judith as a mentor and teacher.
And he's writing poetry, he writes beautiful poems. They're so in English.
So Judith, we're coming to the end. And I'm thinking maybe that if you close us with one more poem, we can do our announcements and then say thank you and good night.
That works.
One more?
I can. Any requests?
Tell you something.
What's that?
So I have to tell you one thing before you start this last poem. I saw Judith at the bookstore and it was wonderful to see her in person. But Judith, I want you to know that seeing you on Zoom and you film my screen, and there's an intimacy with that is quite lovely. So if you all haven't been doing this before she reads her last poem, put it on speaker mode so Judith fills your screen, because that's a gift. No, pretend I didn't say that, Judith, and go on.
Oh, Shirley, you are just too kind. Okay, do we want to read about Himmler or Bosnia?
Oh my God, you pick Himmler or Bosnia. Okay.
Okay, you know what? Bosnia, because it just, I don't know. I always wonder why certain events get so much interest in humanitarian efforts and others don't. And some people don't even know about the war against the Bosnian Muslims and the siege of Sarajevo. One of my best friends is Bosnian Muslim, and I wrote a few poems dedicated to her. So there's a cellist, Vedran Smailovic, and he was in the Sarajevo Symphony during the siege of Sarajevo. And this is a form poem. So that's also why I'm reading it. It's a villanelle. And just an aside, Dylan Thomas, Do Not Go Gentle Until That Good Night. That's one of the most famous villanelles. So I opened with a quote by Vedran Smailovic. You ask me, am I crazy for playing the cello? Why do you not ask if they are not crazy for shelling Sarajevo? Breadline, May 1992. Every day for 22 days in Sarajevo, in the middle of a civil war, a musician sits outside playing cello while mortar shells fall outside his window. In full view of snipers, every day for 22 days in Sarajevo, he plays Albinoni's Adagio dressed in formal concert attire. A musician sits outside playing cello, howitzer shells whistle, strings plucked by his bow. Amidst crumbling rubble in open air, every day for 22 days in Sarajevo, he plays for the dead, for his city, for his sorrow, for 22 friends and neighbors murdered by mortar fire. A musician sits outside playing cello for 22 lives turned into a human inferno, waiting in line for bread in the market square. Every day for 22 days in Sarajevo, a musician sits outside playing his cello. Thank you all so much.
Wow. That was not what I expected. That was quite beautiful. Thank you.
Yes,
I see
thank
people
you. It was
applauding.
beautiful.
Thank you.
So to any last comments, people want to unmute or take a few minutes to do that? I see hearts coming up.
Thank you all so much. I mean, like I said, I wrote a thank you to everybody who came out to watch. A poetry reading is nothing without a circle of friends. And really, again, I'm really touched. Thank you so much.
Your poetry, I think, has touched all of us. So we thank you tremendously. And so just a few announcements. One, where's Miriam? Is Miriam here? I saw Miriam just. Miriam, do you want to announce Slichot for the synagogue? Because we have a big event coming up next week.
This Saturday.
Well, right, it is this week. I don't know what week we're in. We are starting off the Jewish holidays, the High Holy Days, High Holy Day. And so we are kicking those off with Slichot, and there's poetry in that too, right, Judith? So, Miriam.
Sure, it's so hard to make any announcements after listening to this poetry. I am pretty much speechless, but I'll try to regroup. So just a quick announcement, Saturday night is Slichot. We are putting on an amazing event. It is a fun-filled musical Slichot. There's activities for children, there's activities for adults, there's dinner for both, there's babysitting. Do not have to be a member to attend, but we do need you to RSVP online so we know that we have enough food for everyone. You know, you never go hungry at a Jewish event. There's going to be some discussions at dinner. There's Havdalah outside. Looks like the weather's gonna cooperate. And there will be a jazz concert. It'll be sort of like a jazz cafe. We're setting it up. And the kids will have a movie and their dinner. And so I see many of you are already signed up and some of you are helping me, which is great. But if anyone is interested, please sign up tonight if you can, given that I'm going to try to order the food first thing in the morning, since it has to be delivered before Shabbat. So thank you.
So
Is it all inside?
No, dinner is inside. So for the adults, we're going to have dinner inside. Then we're going to go outside for Havdalah and then a jazz concert in the tent. And we're actually setting it up just like a cafe with, you know, little tables for four and high tops. And we're trying to get like a jazzy feel, and there'll be dessert in the tent. And, you know, it should be fun. It should be different.
And Miriam, people can come for all or parts of it, right? So
Right. The only thing you need to RSVP for is dinner if you're coming. But yes, you can come for all, you can come for part. It's really great. There aren't if you have kids and you want to drop them off and, you know, have dinner without them for once and listen to some jazz without them, they will be kept very busy. So we'd love to see you. And again, you do not have to be a member. We just need you to sign up. And it starts at 6:30, dinner. At 6 o'clock, there's a magician for kids. But then 6:30, there's dinner for the adults. Will be doing the upstairs in the social hall, and the kids will be down in the yak. And then the kids will go into some of the classrooms for their activities, and the adults, well, everyone will go outside for, everybody will be outside for $1. The kids will go back in for their evening activities, and the adults will go to the jazz cafe.
Cool, very cool. So Judith, I hope you're reading the chat because you're getting much love there. And so I hope you're reading it. And I just have one more announcement. Our next at Nourish actually isn't until November 1 because of the holidays. And so I couldn't find a free night. And that will be Josh Prager. And his book is called The Family Row. And this is interesting. So this is a journalist who actually turns his journalist research, and I didn't say that well, but he takes his research and it reads like a novel. And it just came out in paperback for those of you who want to buy the book. And Josh says everybody should read the book, but he needs to sell books.
It's very readable. The book is very readable. Yeah. I have it if anyone wants to borrow it.
Right. And it's very big. I should have gotten the paperback. I have the hardback. I can't carry it, but it's great. So Judith, one more time, thank you for doing this. It has been a wonderful evening. And even on this medium of Zoom, it felt intimate and very moving and powerful.
Thank you all so much. I mean, thank you for the love to all of you.
All right.
Shirley, thank you. You know, you do everything. I mean,
We don't talk about that now.
No, we don't. Thank you so much, everybody.
This is your night, Judith.
Okay. Thank
Bye,
you all.
everyone.